Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, hello. My name is Billy Diamond, and welcome to the 26th episode of the Branding for Entertainers podcast. I'm pretty excited about today's episode because we get to talk to Mark Gindick. And Mark is a seasoned pro who has a background in clowning and physical comedy. And the amazing part about his story is that you would never know that he was a shy kid growing up, but he decided that he was going to follow his passion, and that has really earned him some really amazing success in his career so far. And he's been seen on TV with David Letterman, Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and he was also a big part of the PBS miniseries a few years back called Circus. And he got his start as a Ringling Brothers clown by going to clown college, and he eventually became a lead clown within that circus. He worked with the Big Apple Circus as a lead clown for 7 seasons and was also a lead with Circus Soleil. And on this episode, we get a chance to talk with Mark just a little bit about verbal branding and what that means. So here's my guest, Mark Gindick. Mark, thank you so much for just freely giving of your time and being a guest here on the Branding for Entertainers podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Sure.
Let's go down just a little bunny trail real quick so people can get a little bit better of an understanding of who Mark is. What was it for you that made you say, you know what? I think I want to become a professional entertainer.
Yeah. Growing up, if you told me that I was going to be a professional entertainer, I'd be like, yeah, no way. I was always a super shy human, but I grew up with the influences of like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. While other people were watching, Top Gun as a kid, my dad was exposing me to those films. And then when it was time to go to college, because I love movies so much, I went to the SUNY Purchase Film Conservatory in New York to become a filmmaker, to be behind the camera. And once I was there, it was clear that I wanted to put those physical comedy stylings into my filmmaking, and I wanted to do it right. So I took a break from the film conservatory and went to the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Clown College in Sarasota, Florida. There is where I just fell in love with the art form. All through growing up as well, I did Taekwondo and a whole bunch of martial arts. So physicality was part of my vernacular. And then from the greats about physical comedy and also having that physical background as a martial artist, it just kind of felt right. It really fit on my body. So from there, I decided that this was, I guess it chose me more than I chose it. But I went back to school instead of as a filmmaker, majoring in drama instead. And ever since 1997 Clown College, I've ruined my life completely. I went to Clown College with the famed Steve-O from the Jackass movies. We were in the same class. Because I was a filmmaker in Clown College, I always had my video camera. It was a VHS camera back then. And I videotaped everything. And in the middle of the night, Steve-O would always steal my camera because he wanted to get footage, dude. And then I'd be woken up looking at playback in my camera of him jumping off roofs into pools and lighting his farts on fire and stuff like that. So,
well, this episode's not about Steve-O, but that's kind of cool. Let me circle back around. You had a lot of education along the way. How important do you feel that has become even in your career today? Was it a really good, obviously it was a good solid base, but do you think that having those skills and that knowledge catapulted you to where you're at now?
Yeah. Yes. I think studying with people that know what they're doing or seemingly seem like they know what they're doing is a good place to start. I'm going to live in analogy land for a hot second, but I look at going to school like something like Clown College or Del Arte or, studying with Lecoq or something overseas. I look at it as like getting your driver's license. Like you're going to learn how to drive your car, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really know how to drive until you're driving, and driving for a while. So you may learn the skills of being a clown or an entertainer from mentors and masters and teachers, but you're really not going to learn it. You're not going to get great at it until the audience tells you when you're good and when you're bad.
That's really good. That's good information. Yeah. And that comes with stage time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you got to have the stage time.
Got to have the stage time. I look at getting stage time like getting ready for a fight. So like going back to the martial arts and analogy land is that, when you're getting ready for a fight, you're training hard and you're learning your stuff, and then you get into the ring, do your match, and you get the poop knocked out of you. Or you do really well and you're like, oh, I'm going to get better and because I've trained well. But anyway, you're not going to learn until you get the poop knocked out of you. And so you got to train, you got to study, but then you got to fight. You got to get in the ring, and then the audience will tell you when you're good.
What do you say to the entertainer that might be the weekend warrior? And maybe that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a clown. It can be a magician or a juggler, a ventriloquist, or whatever. Any type of those creative art forms where somebody's a weekend warrior. Maybe they're just doing a couple shows, but they want to go full-time pro, but they're scared to do it. How do you get over those jitters? How do you have enough confidence? Where did you find your confidence to say, obviously you had some skill in your background with some formal training, things like that. But how do you, I guess the bigger question is how do you test that material to say, hey, is it going to work? Is it going to fail? And I think it reverts back to what we just said about stage time. But what's your experience with that? How did you have enough confidence to say, I'm Mark Gindick and I'm going to hit the stage running and do it?
Yeah. I mean, to tell you the truth, the confidence thing is always a struggle however long you've been doing it. If I'm working on a new bit, it takes me a while to build the confidence to be like, okay, this is ready to be put in front of an audience. I do a lot of R&D to before I actually get in front of an audience. I admire the people that come up with an idea the night before and be like, I'm just going to try it in front of an audience. It's not in my bag of tricks and able to have confidence to do that. But the good news is if you're a weekend warrior, the good news is you're doing it. You could, lots of people just talk about it forever and actually never truly do it. But to give yourself goals and then try to meet those goals like anything else, I want to lose weight. I want to go to the gym. I want to, you're going to give yourself a goal to do a thing and then you do it. An example of that, when I was first got back from clown college, after the road on Ringling Brothers for a year, I'm still super green. I'm 21 years old. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm moving to Washington Heights in New York City with my best friend, Matt Morgan. And then we reconnect with another buddy, a third buddy named Ambrose Martos. And we decided somehow Ambrose had a connection to Gotham City Improv, a New York club in New York. And we gave ourselves this really horrible goal in the summertime. We said, hey, for the next 2 months, we're going to do a brand new show every Saturday. And the only rule is we can't repeat anything, which is insane. Like insane. It's like a Saturday Night Live thing where you're like, I'm going to make a new show in a week and have it be good. People are paying money to see this thing. Mm-hmm. And what happened is a lot of it was garbage. A lot of it was like, man, that was good. That information of, learning how to drive a little bit better. But some of the material we just did last September in a booking that we're still doing 20 something years later. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's just about doing it. Give yourself that goal. Be like, hey, I'm going to get up every weekend. I'm going to get up every Tuesday. I'm in front of an audience or whatever. Open mics are a real thing. With the pandemic things, everything's different. But yeah, you got to do it. And the only way that you're going to get better is when the audience and you're really listening to the audience. The worst thing to do is that you come back and be like, hey, I killed. And you're like, well, I don't know if you killed or not. The audience told you, if you were listening, that thing didn't work and that thing didn't work. You should tweak this thing. My favorite thing when I'm building acts and bits is editing. I love to edit. I love to put a thing out in front of the audience and then just cut the fat. Like, what are the only things I need to make this thing work? Everything else, cut it out.
Yeah. I was going to say that's like a good movie producer, right? They're going to sit and cut and edit and edit. And you said something that really speaks to me, because I think this is so true. And that is listening to your audience. Just because you like the material doesn't mean they're going to, right? Or that character, or you think this is a great thing. But I think that's really so important, and especially true as being a magician. Um, a lot of times I'll ask a guy, because I fabricate illusions and different tricks and props for magicians. They'll say, I'd like this. And one of the biggest questions I always ask is, well, why? What's the why? How does that fit? And sometimes it's obvious it doesn't fit. And I'll tell them that. But I think it's really, that's a magical chord there, when you can understand your audience to the point you know what they want, and you hone in on that. So really, that's a great tip, I think, personally. I would like to circle back around to, you said that you like to do a lot of research and development before you would go out there and do that. How can you share just maybe a little tidbit of that process? Because the only other way to do it is what you said, and it's get out there and do it, right?
Yeah.
How does that research and development look for you, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah, of course. So, there's no one perfect answer for that, because it's different depending upon what the show is and what the booking is. But for the most part, if it starts with an idea, I have like a short list of people that I'll call on the phone before I even like start going down the rabbit hole of if this is a good idea. But like, is this a good idea? And sometimes they're like, I don't get it. And you're like, well, maybe that's part of it. I need to, solidify exactly what this bit is about, what this act is about. Or they'll say, hey, I think you're on the right track. What if you did X, Y, and Z? It starts as a conversation with like the small group of people that I feel like, are in the same wavelength as me. And I think surrounding yourself with those people is key. I think if you're building anything and you think you can do it by yourself, you're missing the buck here, man. You really gotta, it really does take a village to build anything. I would, venture to say that for, if you're a dancer, singer, magician, whatever. Anyway, I would do that, start there. And then I would get, in the old days before video was so easy, you'd get in front of a mirror and you do it for yourself. Now you can just put on your phone and take yourself making a video and be like, is that any good? And then you can share that with other people. Is that any good? Yeah. And then try to look at it as objectively as possible, not be too hard on yourself, because you don't want to having that critic on your shoulder the entire time. You suck. Don't do that. You suck. That's like the worst thing you can do. You don't know if you suck until you put it in front of an audience. They'll tell you. I promise.
Right. I think it boils back down to also you have to know you as a person, or you as a character, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about branding and where you're coming from and everything else, for me, it's just got to come from truth. It's you, who you are and what your story is. And if it's truthful, then it's going to translate. If it's, all of a sudden you're in a zoot suit and you don't even know anything about that kind of music or that kind of culture, you're like, what are you wearing a zoot suit for? Like, that's not you.
Right.
I happen to be a short, neurotic New Yorker who's myopic and nervous around women. So like, that's my truth. And that's what my work is. And that's where it all comes from. It comes from my truth.
Great advice. And it reiterates what we even talk about here on the Branding for Entertainers podcast. That's the first rule in branding, right? Is just be 100% authentic. Really. That's what you have to be. I want to, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to have you on is with the podcast and just with branding in general, there are certain things to follow. And that is, you really have to refine your visual branding, your verbal branding, and then your virtual branding, which would be your online presence. But I really like to focus just a couple minutes, if we could, and talk about verbal branding, which is basically your messaging. And that can be in the form of written, but also it really conveys about, where what I mean by this is from the time you walk into a venue, it can be how you convey your communications that way, all the way up to your character. And I thought it would be great just to talk a couple minutes about that, because here's what I know about Mark, and anybody who goes and watches anything that you do, a lot of your characters, and especially one you have right now called Wingman, there is no verbal communication as far as with the audience, right? So a lot of those characters you have, there is no verbalization. And I thought, well, what better way to try to communicate verbally than through pantomime? But not everybody's going to do that. But I guess where I'm heading with this is, how do you take a character and verbalize it without verbalizing it? I know it sounds like a silly question. I know. We're going deep, man.
We're going super deep. Yeah, no. It's funny, when I first started building Wingman,
which, by the way, just back up for a second. Those that don't know Wingman, tell them about that character, and then we'll come back around to that question that I had asked.
Oh, sure. So Wingman is essentially an old story told new, a clown's relationship to modern times, like modern times for Charlie Chaplin was the Industrial Revolution. Modern times now is social media. And what's that relationship that the every person has, and the healthy and unhealthy tropes that come along with that. And when we built the show, I say we because I had a lot of help from choreographers to designers to directors, friends, you name it. And what we did was we knocked down the fourth wall and built a fifth wall, plug. And the fifth wall was this giant projection screen that was curated through a program called Watch Out, but it looked like its own social media platform. And we asked people to pull their phones out in the beginning of the show, and this is all in the program. Pull out your phone and communicate with us in real time through this platform. We want you to post. We want you can text, and it'll be projected on the screen in real time. So it was a way of connecting. Can you truly connect through social media, or are you going to put it away? And that was really kind of the goal. I wanted to be able to tell a linear story. There was beginning, middle, and end, like a play, but not using any words, which is like super daunting and ridiculous. And no one should put themselves through that because it's very difficult. Basically, because the work that was usually when I do my nonverbal work, it's story driven. A beginning, middle, and happens for sure, but it's not like a linear story where you're going to be like, oh, this thing happens, and then he goes into this room and he talks to that. It plays less like a play and more like a sketch. This was going to be a play, and so it was very, very difficult, and I don't know how to advise people how to do that other than, tell your personal truth story through physical movement. I feel like good clowning, good physical comedy, there can be words, and the words could help with the storytelling, but in the forefront, the story is being conveyed physically, right? Mm-hmm. And I would transcend that to dance, for example. I feel like clowns and dancers get along really well because we make nothing out of something, or make something out of nothing using our bodies.
Mhm.
And sometimes dancers can talk and they use their voices to tell the story, but often the story of the Nutcracker is told through dance, and you emote feelings and storytelling through your movement and your truth. And that's the truth. Was when I was building Wingman was I was strongly influenced by Charlie Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin, of course, didn't speak. Charlie Chaplin talked about clown's relationship to modern times. That's what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And so that's because that was my truth, and it felt right in my body. Like the second, if it didn't feel right, like I was like, hey, I need to tell my story speaking, like, then I do that. But when building it, all the clues kept pointing to, yeah, you can do this. You can do this without speaking. With that said, like, that's one show, I'm starting to work on a new one-man show now. That is a lot of speaking, a lot of storytelling, a lot of using my voice, of course, using my body in physical storytelling and physical comedy. But the idea of making a new show all nonverbal, that is storytelling and telling my truth, I think I did that. So I think it's time for me to do this other thing. And maybe it will work. Maybe it won't work. Who the hell knows? The audience will tell me.
Yeah. As I watch you in some of your work, and I can't remember if it was the circus series, was that with Big Apple?
Yeah, that was the Big Apple Circus. And that PBS series, PBS followed the Big Apple Circus around for a full season and just told the ins and the outs of what it's, what it's like to put on and tour with a circus.
It really did let the audience behind the curtain, if you will, as to the reality. And that's where I kind of got to know you from, and the love of the different characters. And I think it's neat because as you build your characters, regardless of whether it's over at Big Apple Circus, when you did that, or what you're doing now and you're writing your new show, I believe there's something deeper that's going on there, because people are falling in love with your character because of the fact that a lot of your characters are nonverbal. And I think that's a really neat lesson, too, for us, in that it's not so much what we're saying, but how we're saying it. And I think the correlation there is really unique in what it is that you do. And so many times we try to sing our own praises and be verbal instead of allowing the audience to speak our praises for us. And I think that's why your characters work so well, is because of the fact that you are nonverbal. People fall in love with that character. Is that on the forefront of your mind as you develop these characters, or is that just a byproduct of you being in the performance art style that you're in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. What's funny is I never really think of branding when I'm doing my stuff. I just kind of think of, am I being truthful? And the good thing about clowns, and as we age, is it really is us amplified, and who I was 20 years ago is not who I am now as a 45-year-old man, and that means I get to make new material as this 45-year-old man. I can always create. I'm always going to be influenced by my life.
What you've said throughout this podcast so far, and I think it's to be true, and that is you're just being your authentic self, and you are the brand every day, right? And your situation is a little bit different than just being the straight man who goes on stage and just does it, right? There's a lot of character development that's involved with your stuff. You're a supersized you when you go on stage, right? Which I think every performer should be that to a degree, but yours is probably elevated a little bit more, I would guess, with having the characters you have.
Yeah, totally. Here's something that happened in my 20s that was a giant light bulb moment for me. In my 20s, I was dating a dancer who was a personal trainer. And back then I was like 100 pounds soaking wet. I was little. And I was like, I guess I got to start working out. I should start working out. And then I started working out. And And then I maybe I worked out a little bit too much over that time period where my friends were like, you're starting to look a little weird. And, but it didn't matter. Like for some reason in my mind, because I was so in love with this girl and I felt like that was the right thing to do, I was like, I'm going to put on muscle. And I was in the gym and there was a 6'4" muscle dude. I mean, like his muscles had muscles, just gigantic. I'm not 6'4". I'm 5'4". And I go up to him and go, hey man, I want to look like you. What can I do? And he turns to me and he puts his arm around me and puts me in front of the mirror. And he goes, you see me? Yep. You see you? Yep. You're never going to look like me. And I was, at first it's like, right to the heart, dude. Like, what do you mean? I can work out. I'm going to get muscles. Like, the point of the matter is I'm never going to be 6'4". I'm never going to have like, Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles. And I shouldn't. That's not me. That's not my truth. I was pursuing something that was not my truth.
Hey, man, that's something that I see a lot of entertainers do, and I'm sure you have over the years, too, where it's like they're trying to be something they're not. I'm like you. I'm that short guy, too, where it's like I'm never going to be the tall guy. Embrace what you got. And I'm sure that really plays into a lot of your character development, too, embracing what you got, right? I'm sure the being short in stature like we are, use it to your advantage, right?
Right.
And that becomes part of obviously your visual branding as well.
For me, it's all shades of gray. You know what I mean? Visual serves the audio, and audio serves the visual, and then your work serves that. If it's serving itself, it's as like a perfect moving machine, then you can't go wrong.
So, Mark, over the years, you actually got your start with Ringling, and you've had some other really great places that you've worked for, or institutions, I should say. Cirque du Soleil. You also worked for Big Apple Circus. Is there one particular place that you worked that you said, oh my gosh, my life is just going so good. This is it?
That's a really interesting question. When people ask me about that kind of thing, I say there are three kinds of jobs, right? There's the kind of job that you do because it pays money, right? It may not be artistically gratifying, but you're making good money. You're looking at the bank, you're like, this is it. This feels good. And there are other kind of jobs that you do for the art's sake because it feels good artistically, but your pocket is not so great. And then there's that elusive job that is like once in a blue moon where the money is good, they're treating you good, and it feels right artistically. So far, that's happened to me once, and that was the season that you saw on PBS at the Big Apple Circus. It wasn't, it's not, I wouldn't say that the show, that the success or the feeling good about a show that you're on is exclusive to that show. Like, Cirque du Soleil is amazing. And of course you want to work at it. Yes, Cirque du Soleil was amazing. I had a great time, but it's really about the people that you're surrounded with. And one season on the Big Apple Circus might not be the same season another year because it's the people that you're surrounded with. You really do make a family on that show that you're on because most of the time you're away from your real family. And this new family you're eating with, you're working with, you're sweating with, you're crying with. And if that group of people are the people that you want to be around with and make you feel good, and you're making money and you're doing the work that you love to do, that elusive feeling, it is something I think that all entertainers chase. And one of the reasons why we keep doing it, because it's a hard job, y'all, being an entertainer. And if you don't love it at the end of the day, if you don't get home or your hotel room or wherever, you're like, wow, that felt great. Like, you probably shouldn't do it. Because mostly it's times where there's rejection and tears. I bombed, that was horrible, or they don't want to hire me because of X, Y, and Z. That stuff is real. But at the end of the day, if you don't love doing it, and I mean love doing it, probably shouldn't do it.
That is really strong, good, accurate advice. And I can't thank you enough for being on the Branding for Entertainers podcast. I know that my listeners are going to glean so much, just even from your story about how you were a shy kid and you made your way to doing what you love, because I think that's all our aspiration, is chasing it is what we love to do. So thank you again, and I'm going to have you back on another podcast next week, if that's okay, and we can kind of tie things up in a nice little bow. So how's that sound?
Yeah, totally. That's fine.
Great. Well, thank you once again for being on the podcast. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure.
Well, that concludes this episode of the Branding for Entertainers podcast. However, please don't click out of this just yet, because following this ending music, I want to introduce you to something very special, and it's going to be an ongoing episode on the Branding for Entertainers podcast where we talk with ventriloquist Landon Harvey on a regular basis in a little episode on virtual branding. Let me introduce that to you right now.
Virtual viewpoint with Landon.
Landon Harvey, welcome to this little segment of the podcast where you're going to be a feature every single episode. I'm so excited about that because you know how to do virtual branding. And what I mean by that is your online presence. And what better way to do that with social media? And you've built quite the following. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Of course. The real thing that got me hooked on social media was TikTok, and that was back in 2019, and I started growing my following on TikTok. I think I got anywhere from like 10 to 20,000 followers overnight.
Oh, come on, no way.
Yeah, it was insane. I remember leaving class to go to pretend to go to the bathroom to then check my analytics and my stats, because this was back in 2019. There were, barely anyone was on TikTok. And so I had just posted videos of me and my puppets doing jokes, and it had skyrocketed. And it was just so crazy. I remember how I had like 500,000 followers in no time. But it's really been such a journey since then. And from realizing my success on TikTok, people.
So if you're interested in learning more about how to grow your brand on social media and across different platforms, not just TikTok, but various platforms, and you're struggling, I would like you to stay tuned, because we're going to talk about that with Landon every single episode, and you can learn how to grow and grow better and build a better following. So stay tuned for that. The Branding for Entertainers podcast is produced by me, Billy Diamond, in Hershey, Pennsylvania. All guests on this podcast have agreed to be a part of it and its recordings. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved.